We're standing outside one of the most unique facilities in all of Europe, as far as we know in the entire world, and it is tucked away here in the center of Athens at the edge of the Attiko Alsos neighborhood. It is called the Open Center for Migrants Registered for Assisted Voluntary Return and Reintegration, and it is run by the International Organization for Migration, or IOM. The center was established exactly 10 years ago with a ministerial decree published in September 2015 and formally opened later that year in December 2015. The Syriza government at the time had promised to shut down the migration detention centers in Greece and adopt more open facilities. But as the number of asylum seekers in Greece rose in the years after 2015, that promise quickly unraveled. Meanwhile, this center remains, the only one of its kind in all of Europe. So what is it exactly? First, a little bit about the terminology. Voluntary returns were common in Europe in the 1970s as a means of disposing of unwanted guest workers. The Netherlands, for example, introduced them in 1974 to reintegrate guest workers from Turkey, Tunisia, and Morocco. And similar programs were created in France in 1977 and Germany in 1983. By 2010, some 26 EU member states, as well as Norway and Switzerland, had voluntary returns programs. In Europe, they are all administered by or run in partnership with IOM. They are called assisted because IOM usually provides support to individuals who want to leave. This support usually involves helping people get travel documents from the embassies or clearance from the police.
Ο Διεθνής Οργανισμός Μετανάστευσης σου δίνει τη δυνατότητα να επιστρέψεις στη χώρα σου με ασφάλεια και αξιοπρέπεια. Πρόγραμμα εθελοντικής επιστροφής και επανένταξης για υπηκόους τρίτων χωρών.
Support can also come in the form of cash that individuals receive right before they board the plane.
The program provides financial assistance of €1,000 per person for those residing in mainland Greece and €500 for those residing on the islands.
In Greece, this support also takes another very unique form. For people who are registered in the program but are in a vulnerable situation, because, for example, they're homeless, they can stay at the center while they finalize the procedure. That's the role of the Open Center. So IOM cites voluntariness as an important aspect of the program.
Voluntariness is key for the preparation of the return, thereby contributing to the sustainability of reintegration. It is important for migrants to understand how AVRR works and know their options to make an informed decision.
But in internal documents, such as this IOM training material, the organization does not shy away from stating that the people it deports don't actually have a choice, and that this lack of options is actually a good thing.
Acceptance of the AVR option rests on there being no other choice in light of the temporary nature of the status granted to the individuals in question.
From the inception of the program, IOM has been involved in facilitating deportations. For example, when the Syriza government decided to reopen the detention centers in 2016, IOM renovated the main detention center near Athens.
Amygdaleza camp, with a capacity of 158 individuals, was renovated with the support of IOM. The camp offers hospitality to families of third country nationals registered to AVRR coming from the Greek islands to Athens in order to return to their home country with safety and dignity. Thanks to IOM's support, the pre-removal centre of Amygdaleza provides decent accommodation conditions to vulnerable third country nationals, ready to return voluntarily to their country of origin.
For the past few months, we have been investigating the business side of these voluntary returns in Greece, and what we have uncovered is an EU-funded deportation machine that takes advantage of undocumented people in Greece while hiding this veil of voluntariness. The IOM has a near monopoly on the business of voluntary returns. It runs around 95% of assisted voluntary returns and reintegration programs in the world. IOM itself has been present in Greece since 1952, and its mission at the time was to facilitate the immigration of Greeks to other countries, such as the United States, Australia, and Canada, by giving them vocational trainings before they leave. Of course, this change in IOM's approach to a facilitator of deportations is not lost on anyone. As one Greek official we've spoken to told us, it is quite the paradox that the Organization for Migration is now working to prevent migration.
We have tools which are at our disposal, which we could use from a legal point of view. For example, voluntary returns are not defined legally,
Right.
but expulsion is defined. So I always say that voluntary return is a form of expulsion, just to invite people to think that there's nothing voluntary in voluntary returns, actually. And we should stop even to talk about returns, because these people are expelled. They are induced to go back to their own country through a very sophisticated mechanism.
The truth is that there is no structural system for migration in Greece that is holistic. So there are no legal pathways for Greece. And also the system is framed like that doesn't consider integrating migrants. So people who are here, and they might be for a long time, we have people who were here in the country, who worked, who have families, who had a job, and suddenly they were out of the system. And the only way that they can feel safe, or at least they're in this vulnerability state, the only way that they can feel safe is through a voluntary return, which means that this is the only way that they can go back to their country instead of being here and being undocumented. And this is the only option that they have. So if we were talking about this choice, it's not the rational choice. It's the only choice that you have.
In detention, any semblance of a choice disappears. IOM employees regularly visit the detainees to convince them to sign up to their voluntary returns program. For those who don't, detention can last up to 18 months.
It happens in Corinthos less. But in Amygdalisa, the cops and IOM come every day. Not to the rooms, but at least the main areas.
This is a message from a person who is currently in detention in the Corinthos Center, west of Athens, where keeping their identity secret. Instead, we have hired an actor to voice their responses to the questions we sent them over WhatsApp.
I came to Greece in the end of 2015. I came to island of Lesbos. I am now like 10 years in Greece. They have arrested me now for the third time because I don't want to go further into Europe and I'm stuck in the Greek system. I have been detained for documents and have had to live 18 months once a year again in detention. And now it's already 10 months again. They have destroyed my life systematically. IOM does these returns because they want to support the government, because they were there for whoever wants to go. But now they make a trap together with the asylum center cops and IOM. Basically, the asylum office will tell you to make an asylum claim while you are detained, and then the cops say that you will be forcibly deported. So people make asylum claims to save themselves from forced deportation. And then IOM shows up in the camps, and people who don't want to be forcefully deported and know they won't get asylum apply for the voluntary return program with IOM, so they at least get some money. Not many people do it either. They make fun of the minimal money they are getting, but there are some people who do it.
We cannot tell for sure how many people IOM is deporting from detention because they don't publish the numbers. But we did obtain the numbers for the first 2 years of the program. Between June 2016 and May 2017, IOM deported some 632 people from detention. In the second year of the program, between June 2017 In May 2018, IOM deported some 943 people from detention versus 898 from refugee camps and so-called open sites. Also, all these deportations cost a significant amount of money. To understand this, we tracked down the amount of EU funding that the IOM Center received in comparison with the police detention centers. For example, under a round of EU funding between 2014 and 2020, IOM received almost 54 million euros to run its AVRR program, including for running the center. In comparison, from the same EU fund, the Hellenic police got about 12 million euros to conduct forced deportations and around 60 million to run its deportation centers, or PROKEKA. In the most recent round of funding, from 2021 to 2027, IOM is set to receive some 52 million euros over 52 months to run its voluntary deportations. And despite all this investment, since 2019, the International Organization for Migration has been failing to achieve its deportation targets. For example, between September 2019 and August 2022, IOM aimed to return 16,500 people. It managed just over 9,300. After the program was extended by another year, the final number of the people it returned was a bit more than 10,000. When a new program was initiated in September 2023, IOM pledged to implement 17,000 voluntary returns by December 2027.
Οι στόχοι, όπως βλέπετε, είναι 17.000 ωφελούμενοι θα λάβουν βοήθεια για την επιστροφή στη χώρα καταγωγής τους.
But from the start of the project until June 2025, they have only returned 4,112 people. At this current rate, the project will miss its target again. So why keep pouring money into a program that consistently fails its targets? Because for the European Union and its member states, the phrase voluntary returns has a nice ring to it. They are presented as safe and dignified alternatives to forced deportation.
And we all know that voluntary return is much easier, it's much cheaper, it's much better for anybody involved.
I think there are a number of different reasons why states much prefer so-called voluntary humanitarian return rather than forced deportations. Firstly, the whole notion of forced returns has a very negative connotation. It can generate very bad publicity for the states concerned, and especially when people have to be handcuffed, put onto planes by armed security guards and strapped to their seat. This often generates a lot of bad publicity that states would much rather avoid. A second reason why states prefer voluntary returns is they're much less risky. There have been a number of recent occasions when European governments have tried to deport people in an involuntary manner, and they've been injured or even killed in the process when they've tried to resist deportation, particularly at the hands of security guards. A third consideration for states is simply a very basic one, which is cost. It's much, much cheaper to provide a ticket for somebody to go back to their own country on a regular flight, rather than have to charter a special flight to employ security guards with special equipment, special training, etc. So states would much rather take the cheaper option of getting people to return on a so-called voluntary basis.
Voluntary returns also allow EU countries to send people back to places where they cannot be deported, either because those countries won't accept them or because doing so would breach international law.
Obviously, if we have no arrangements or agreements in place with a third country, then it becomes extremely important that we have good return counseling structures and also provision of reintegration services upon the arrival. So then the voluntary return is where we should be investing our efforts.
This is especially relevant to countries such as Iraq, which refuses to accept the forced deportations of their nationals. Voluntary returns are used to circumvent this obstacle.
That was the decision of the Iraqi government, which wanted anyway to promote, to get involved in these programs with a view to alleviating the impact of people being forcibly returned to Iraq, and with the vision according to which, well, we will accept only returns which are voluntary and not enforced return. It was a kind of, you know, it was a way of showing for the Iraqi government that, well, there was a national dignity was involved, you know, in this in this cooperation, let's say. And so we wanted our nationals to go back to Iraq, but on a voluntary basis, which is a masquerade, as I'm sure you understand when you know how assisted voluntary return programs are implemented. Inevitably, I mean, people were induced, you know, to accept these AVR programs when they were detained or in other situations anyway.
IOM itself does not necessarily hide how useful its program is to the Greek government.
I think there is a lot of job to do still. If you look at the statistics and the data on the arrivals yesterday and last night, the number of people that are trying to enter the EU and Greece or through Greece is still increasing. So I think that the reassurance to have the AVR project as one of the elements of migration management of the government of Greece is reassuring for the future of IOM, Greece, and the European Union.
And in recent years, IOM's AVR has shifted its focus completely onto one specific community, Georgian nationals. Since September 2023, almost 80% of people who signed up to leave Greece with IOM were from Georgia. This is a shift in the priorities of the current government, who wants to dispose of undocumented people in Greece however it can. So for a lot of people, this ends up being a choice between a rock and a hard place. A recent law change has made being undocumented a criminal offense in Greece and extended the maximum length of detention in pre-removal centers to 24 months.
In my view, the right way out is to somehow have a way, a sanctioning way for somebody that does something illegally. They stay within the state borders of Greece illegally. So, as I previously announced, I shall penalize illegal stay. And this means a very, very strict framework of criminal treatment, penal treatment. So these people will have to go in front of a criminal judge, the judge of criminal cases. So, of course, my objective is not to fill up jails, but we need to have a framework for these people not to stay in a situation they cannot stay in. So we'll give them the possibility, after imposing a sanction, for those that want it, to go back voluntarily, a voluntary return. So the execution of the penalty shall be suspended if they opt for going back.
This is a good example of what most of the migrants, not just the Georgians, are facing. And it has to do with the fact that there is no stable migration policy, which means that we have a lot of people. I mean, it's a good example for the Georgian community because there are people who are here 5, 10, 15, 20 years. They have their families, they have their jobs, and suddenly they are out of the system. So they are trying to find a way to get into the system, but they cannot do that. And because the situation is like that and is getting worse and migration is criminalized, and there are a lot of stop and checks, and people are afraid to move. People cannot afford to live like that. They cannot afford to live in a place where they are considered to be criminals just because they don't have a paper. So the only way that they find that it is safe is to move back to their country. But this is not an easy decision. Because there are a lot of people who have families here, who have brought their families here.
We contacted the Greek office of the International Organization for Migration for comments. This was part of their response.
The project targets are directly connected with the available budget, priorities, and requirements as defined by the donor. Under the current project cycle launched in September 2023, IOM has pledged to assist up to 17,000 individuals with voluntary return by December 2027. While 4,112 returns until June 2025 may suggest a slower pace, it is important to emphasize that migration patterns are neither linear nor predictable, and return numbers can fluctuate significantly due to many factors, both in the host country and the countries of origin as well.
IOM did not provide a response to the rest of our questions.